The snowstorm howled through the towering pines of the remote Silverpine Valley, its icy fingers rattling the old timber walls of Elias Rowan's cabin. Inside, the retired smoke jumper sat alone in his living room, a battered leather chair pulled close to the fireplace, where flames danced and threw fleeting shadows across the rough-hewn beams. Elias had been stranded for 4 days, the narrow mountain road buried beneath feet of wind-sculpted snow. The only sounds were the occasional creak of the cabin settling and the soft snap of firewood. He sipped a mug of black coffee, weary from solitude, when a faint, frantic scratching cut through the stillness. He paused, cup midair. There it was again, a muffled, desperate whimper. Setting his mug aside, Elias rose, heart thudding, and moved toward the sound. Came from the front door. As he approached the frost-glazed window, his breath caught. There, barely visible through swirling snow, stood a German shepherd, her lean frame shivering violently, eyes wide and pleading. Pressed tightly against her sides were 2 tiny puppies, half buried beneath her protective body. Frost clung to her fur, and clouds of breath puffed from her nose. Elias hesitated. Opening the door could invite trouble. But as their gazes locked, something primal stirred within him. The choice he was about to make would change all of their lives. He lingered for a moment longer, his hand hovering just inches from the door's cold brass knob. His mind played through a dozen scenarios, none of them comforting. The mountains weren't a place for stray animals. If she had wandered here, through the storm, it meant she had nowhere else to go. In another life, when he was younger and 1,000 feet above the forest canopy with flames licking at his boots, Elias had learned to trust instincts honed through smoke and fear. The same instincts now whispered urgently in his ear, "Help her." Outside, the shepherd shifted her weight, a visible tremor rippling through her skeletal frame. She nudged one of the pups closer beneath her belly, then looked back at Elias with an expression that seemed almost human. An exhausted plea, stripped of pride or fear. For a moment, a memory flickered across Elias's mind, one of his final fire jumps years ago in Black Bear Canyon. A mother deer and her fawn had been caught between the blaze and a rock wall. Against orders, Elias and his partner had carved a crude firebreak, guiding the pair through choking smoke to safety. He remembered how the doe had looked back at him, her wide, tear-bright eyes shimmering in the firelight. The shepherd's gaze now mirrored that same desperate trust. Elias exhaled sharply and wrenched the door open a foot. An Arctic wind knifed through the cabin, scattering ash from the hearth and frosting his eyelashes in an instant. The shepherd didn't flinch. She held her ground, muscles taut as a bowstring, her pups whimpering faintly beneath her. "Come on, girl," Elias coaxed, voice hoarse from disuse. "No sense in dying out there." He crouched slowly, careful not to startle her. Every motion deliberate. He extended an open palm, the universal gesture of peace. A minute passed. 2. The shepherd's ribs heaved beneath her thin coat. Her paws shifted nervously, but her body remained poised between flight and surrender. Her maternal instinct screamed to protect the fragile lives at her side, but some deeper instinct, forged by exhaustion and raw need, urged her toward the warmth inside. Finally, she inched forward, one trembling step, then another. The smaller of the 2 pups gave a plaintive squeak and rolled sideways in the snow. Without hesitation, the mother gently gathered the pup in her jaws and crept forward again, leaving faint tracks in the drifted snow like the brushstrokes of a trembling hand. Elias backed away from the door, giving her space. The shepherd crossed the threshold in a single desperate movement, collapsing onto the cabin floor in a shivering heap. Her eyes never left Elias as she released the pup beside its sibling, then curled her body protectively around them both. Elias shut the door with a resounding thud. The silence that followed was almost surreal, as though the storm's fury had been sealed outside. He moved quickly, grabbing an old wool blanket from the sofa and unfolding it with shaking fingers. As he approached, The shepherd's lips curled back in a faint snarl. Not aggression, but the last reserve of a creature pushed beyond endurance. "It's all right," Elias murmured, crouching beside her once more. "You're safe here, I promise." He laid the blanket nearby and retreated. The shepherd's eyes followed him, but after a moment, she nosed the pups onto the blanket's edge, then curled around them once more. The pups were impossibly small, their fur still slick with the dampness of birth. One had a faint white blaze on its muzzle. The other was entirely black save for a single tawny paw. They wriggled blindly, seeking warmth and the faint comfort of their mother's heartbeat. Elias watched, throat tight. In another world, another life, he might have ignored the scratching, left the door closed, rationalized it away. But something about this fragile tableau, a mother's desperate gamble, the tiny lives hanging in the balance, pierced through the layers of solitude he built around himself. He found himself remembering a passage from a book his late wife had once loved. "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer." That invincible summer now stirred faintly within Elias, thawed by the sight before him. He stoked the fire higher, adding a fresh log. The shepherd flinched at the sharp crack, then settled again as the warmth spread through the room. A question hung unspoken between them. Where had you come from? She bore the marks of a long, bitter journey. Her pads were cracked and bleeding, her nails worn to splinters. Her fur was matted with ice, clumps of dirt, and dried blood. Some scars ran old and faded, others fresh. She had fought her way through more than snow to reach this cabin. Elias knew the land. He knew there were no farms for miles, no homes but his own this deep into Silverpine. How far had she traveled, and why? The answers could wait, for now survival came first. He filled a metal bowl with warm water and slid it toward her, speaking softly all the while. "You're a fighter, aren't you? Got more guts than most men I've known." The shepherd sniffed the water, then drank in slow, measured laps. The pups whimpered softly, pressing tighter into her side. Elias watched them long into the night, the firelight painting their fragile forms in gold and shadow. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent and relentless. But within the cabin, a fragile sanctuary had taken shape, a mother's love, a man's unexpected compassion, and 3 lives woven together by fate. As dawn's first light pressed faintly against the frost-rimed windows, Elias made a quiet vow. "You're safe now, and whatever storm brought you here, you'll never face another one alone." The shepherd didn't budge when Elias slowly cracked open the door. She remained rooted in place, trembling but unmoving, her desperate eyes tracking his every motion. Snow drifted in on an Arctic gust. "Come on, girl," Elias coaxed, voice low, crouching to appear less threatening. "You'll freeze to death out here." The shepherd whimpered softly, glanced at her pups, and after a tense moment, took a cautious step forward. One of the pups stumbled, legs barely functioning in the cold. Gently, the mother picked it up by the scruff and moved inside, followed by the second. Elias closed the door quickly against the blizzard's roar. The cabin's sudden warmth made the shepherd tremble more violently as her body adjusted. Elias fetched an old wool blanket and draped it over her and the pups. She flinched but didn't resist. The pups, eyes barely open, wheezed with labored breaths. When Elias reached out to touch one, a warning growl rumbled from the mother's throat. All right, he murmured, raising his hands. "You're a good mom. You've been through hell, haven't you?" He filled a bowl with warm water and placed it nearby. She eyed him warily but soon began to lap it up, her pups pressing closer to her warmth. Where had she come from? How had she survived the storm with 2 newborns? Her emaciated frame suggested she had been alone for some time. Yet here she was, a living testament to grit and motherly instinct. As the night wore on, Elias worked to make them comfortable. He laid towels for the pups, set food nearby, and kept the fire blazing. Gradually, the shepherd's guard began to lower. By dawn, she allowed her head to rest on the blanket, her breathing steady. Elias sat in his chair, watching them as sleep claimed them. He made a silent vow. They were safe now, and he would do everything in his power to keep it that way. The minutes dragged into hours as the storm raged outside, a constant howl beneath the cabin's thick logs. Each gust sounded like a distant, mournful cry. Elias knew well the dangers of this kind of cold. Hypothermia didn't just sap warmth. It leached the very will to move, to think, to live. And yet this dog, thin and battered, had summoned enough strength to protect her young, to brave the elements and claw her way to a stranger's door. There was a particular kind of valor in that, a raw, instinctual courage that Elias had seen before, though never quite like this. Years ago, while fighting a wildfire in the Bitterroot Mountains, he'd witnessed a mother bear, singed and limping, shepherd her 2 cubs through a smoldering ravine. The sight had stayed with him all these years, not the ferocity of the bear, but her unwavering focus, her refusal to surrender. This shepherd had that same look in her eye. As the firelight flickered across the walls, Elias watched the mother dog more closely. Now that she was still, subtle details revealed themselves, details that spoke volumes. Her coat, though dirty and clumped with ice, had once been thick and well kept. Faint impressions of a collar's wear mark circled her neck. Someone had once cared for her, or at least had owned her. But somewhere along the way, that story had changed. How long had she been wandering? Had the pups been born during this odyssey, their fragile lives beginning amidst hunger and frostbite? Or had she escaped with them from some cruel confinement? The questions twisted in Elias's mind like smoke. He rose again, moving quietly to a battered wooden chest in the corner. Inside were a few old towels, a couple of knitted throws from his late wife, Marla. He paused, fingers brushing the soft wool of one familiar blanket, the same one Marla had used to comfort stray cats that would sometimes appear on their porch. A small smile touched his lips, bittersweet. Marla had always believed in tending to the lost and wounded. You never know when someone's fought their last battle, she'd said. Sometimes all they need is a safe place to rest. Elias carried the throw over and gently spread it beside the fire, giving the shepherd more options for warmth. The mother dog lifted her head slightly but did not growl this time. Her gaze met his with wary exhaustion. "You're doing good, girl," Elias said softly. "Real good." It was then he noticed the pups more clearly, tiny, trembling bodies with their eyes barely slitted open, seeking the warmth of their mother's belly. Their breaths came in shallow, uneven patterns. One gave a faint, high-pitched whimper that tugged at Elias's heart. Without thinking, he fetched a small tin of evaporated milk from the pantry and warmed some over the stove, pouring it into a shallow dish. While the mother continued to nurse them, he left it nearby in case it was needed later. The cabin, once a refuge of solitary quiet, now pulsed with a fragile rhythm of life. Outside, the wind battered against the window panes like some great restless beast. But within these walls, a sacred calm had settled. A fire's glow, the steady breaths of the pups, the gentle rustle of the mother's shifting body, all these simple sounds created a kind of sanctuary. For Elias, the change was profound. Retirement had brought him here to Silverpine for peace, for distance from the tragedies he'd witnessed in a lifetime of firefighting. But solitude had a way of hardening the soul. Tonight, as he sat watch over this battered family, he felt an unexpected thaw within himself, as if some old door had quietly creaked open. He leaned back in his chair and allowed his mind to wander. How often do we pass by those who have fought silent battles, unseen and uncelebrated? In cities and towns, on streets and alleys, there were human and animal stories alike that mirrored the shepherd's. A fight for life amid apathy, a search for kindness in a world too often indifferent. And yet, Even the smallest act of refuge, a door opened, a blanket shared, could shift the tides of fate. He watched as the mother finally relaxed further, her breathing growing deeper, her head resting heavily on her paws. One of the pups squeaked again, blindly nuzzling her flank. The other shifted closer, finding the warmth it craved. It struck Elias then, how thin the line was between life and loss. If he'd chosen to ignore the scratching, if the door had remained shut for even an hour longer, this fragile tableau might have ended in tragedy. The thought sent a chill through him deeper than any winter wind. Outside, dawn's first pale light began to creep across the snow-laden valley, painting the edges of the frost-rimed window with a soft glow. The storm still whispered in the distance but had spent its fiercest breath. A new day was breaking. Elias rose quietly and added another log to the fire, its pop and crackle a comforting sound in the pre-dawn hush. Then he returned to his chair, gaze resting once more on the small family before him. "You're safe now," he whispered, the words both a promise and a prayer. "And you'll never be alone again." The shepherd shifted slightly, eyes fluttering open. For a brief moment, their gazes met, not as man and animal, but as two beings who understood, in their own way, the long road through storms and fire. As the first rays of sunlight touched the cabin floor, Elias felt something he hadn't in years, a quiet, steady sense of purpose. In a world battered by wind and time, 3 fragile lives had found their sanctuary, and in offering them shelter, he had rediscovered his own. Morning sunlight reflected off a pristine blanket of snow. The storm had passed. Elias rubbed sleep from his eyes and immediately checked the small family by the fire. The shepherd, whom he had silently started calling Grace, was curled around her pups. When Elias stirred, her amber eyes flicked open, still wary but lacking the desperate edge of the night before. "Morning, girl," he greeted softly. From his sparse pantry, Elias found a can of beef stew, heated it, and set a bowl before her. After sniffing cautiously, Grace ate, while her pups squirmed beneath her. There was a quiet satisfaction in watching her eat. Each careful bite was a small victory. Elias couldn't help but think of the resilience wired into creatures like Grace. Nature had always been a stern teacher, yet those who survived its trials emerged with a wisdom deeper than instinct alone. He thought of the wolves he'd once observed during a prescribed burn in Glacier National Park. From a distance, through smoke-dappled trees, he had glimpsed a gray she-wolf shepherding her half-grown cubs along a charred ridge. Every step was purposeful. Her gaze swept the landscape with fierce intelligence. Now, years later, that same spirit burned in Grace's eyes. Later that morning, Elias phoned the local vet clinic in nearby Pine Hollow. "This is Elias Rowan. I've got a German Shepherd and 2 pups here, bad shape. Can you take a look?" "Of course, Mr. Rowan," the receptionist replied. "Bring them in this afternoon." The trip was arduous. Coaxing Grace onto a blanket took patience. She growled softly when he got too close to her pups, but Elias reassured her gently. Finally, he carried them to his old pickup. It wasn't lost on him that trust, once broken in a creature, was a fragile thing to rebuild. He remembered an old firefighter's adage, "You don't fight fire, you outlast it. One breath, one step at a time." That same quiet persistence was what Grace needed now. Not commands, not pressure, but room to rediscover safety. As they drove through the winding, ice-slick roads toward town, Elias kept glancing into the rearview mirror. Grace's form was tense but composed. Her amber gaze flicked between her pups and the landscape blurring past the window. The pups huddled close, seeking warmth from both their mother and the battered wool beneath them. At Pine Hollow Vet, Dr. Rebecca Calloway examined Grace with a practiced eye. "She's severely underweight," Dr. Calloway said, "but she's resilient. Her pups are lucky to have her." "You say she just showed up?" Elias nodded. She chose my door. Well, the vet smiled. She chose well. Back home, Grace was calmer. She allowed Elias to sit closer and, after some hesitation, to gently stroke her head. Her body relaxed. The bond between them had begun. You're safe here, Elias whispered. I don't know what you've been through, but you've found a place now. As the firelight flickered against her tired frame, a thought stirred within Elias, one he hadn't dared dwell on in years. Sometimes life doesn't give second chances, but when it does, you take them. And sometimes you make them. Over the following weeks, trust blossomed. Grace regained strength. Her coat shone once more. Her ribs became less prominent. The pups, whom Elias named Rust and Cole, grew playful and spirited. Elias spent hours near the fire, watching them explore. Grace's cautious eyes softened. Her growls faded. Eventually, she allowed Elias to pet her freely. The cabin, once silent, now pulsed with life. Tiny paws scampering across wooden floors, soft barks echoing off the beams. It was a transformation that felt almost sacred. In those simple, quiet moments, Elias found himself observing the trio with a reverence usually reserved for ancient rituals. The way Rust and Cole tumbled across the woven rugs, their little bodies colliding in mock battle, seemed like a celebration of existence itself. Life, fragile and insistent, had taken root in his cabin, casting out shadows that had lingered for too long. One crisp afternoon, Elias noticed Grace standing at the window, tail wagging slightly as he chopped wood. She was watching him, trust evident in her eyes. When he returned inside, she greeted him willingly. You're full of surprises today, he chuckled, kneeling to scratch behind her ears. It was in such small gestures that healing unfolded, not as a single moment, but as countless acts of patience and presence. Trust, Elias realized, wasn't a door you could force open. It was a path you cleared one careful step at a time. Yet questions lingered. Who had failed her? The faint scars beneath her fur, her cautious nature. Someone had hurt her. Sometimes, late at night, Elias found himself pondering this as he gazed into the fire. Scars told stories, both on skin and soul. They were the body's way of saying, I was wounded, but I survived. Grace carried her history etched across her frame, and though she had begun to trust him, some wounds, he knew, ran deeper than the eye could see. He thought back to men he'd known in his smoke-jumping days, men who'd leapt from plains into walls of flame, only to wrestle with the invisible burns that lingered long after. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the choice to move forward despite it. Grace embodied that truth with every tentative wag of her tail. Later, at the Pine Hollow Animal Shelter, Elias showed Grace's photo to the director, Sarah Linwood. No one's reported her, Sarah said, but dogs like her, we see it too often. Backyard breeders, puppy mills, when they're no longer useful, they're dumped. Rage simmered within Elias. Grace had been discarded, but not anymore. He wondered, how could anyone justify such cruelty? How had we, as a species capable of such compassion, allowed convenience to eclipse conscience? The questions haunted him as he drove home, one hand resting gently on the passenger seat where Grace lay, eyes half closed in wary contentment. Driving home, he looked at Grace. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you again. In her amber gaze, he saw understanding. A bond had been sealed, and somewhere deep inside, Elias felt something shift, an old ache giving way to a new purpose. Days passed in fragile calm, but one moonlit evening, as Elias sat by the fire, Grace bolted to the door, growling. Elias peeked outside. A figure stood at the tree line, a man cloaked in shadow. Heart pounding, Elias phoned the sheriff. Someone's outside my cabin. Deputy Nora Maddox soon arrived. Tracks lead right up to your property, she reported grimly. And there's a rope tied to a tree. Looks recently used. The words settled in Elias's gut like a stone. He knew enough of the woods to understand what that meant. A rope tied deliberately in view of the cabin wasn't some careless act. It was a message, or worse, a preparation. The knowledge churned beneath his ribs, fueling a protective fire that now burned as fiercely for Grace and her pups as any wildfire he'd faced in his younger days. That night, he kept the rifle within reach and slept in the old rocker near the door. Grace lay close, her body taut with vigilance. The pups, oblivious to the dark presence that lurked beyond the timberline, nursed and nuzzled against their mother. Elias couldn't help but wonder, how many other creatures had endured this same dance of survival? How many had wandered into strange places seeking refuge, only to be hunted again by the very hands they'd fled? The next morning, the figure returned, closer this time. Rifle in hand, Elias stepped onto the porch. "That's my dog," the man sneered. "She got out. I'm taking her back." The man's voice was sharp, a brittle sound that rang with misplaced entitlement. Elias's grip tightened on the rifle. The cold mountain air bit at his skin, but a deeper chill came from the knowledge that this wasn't just some misunderstanding. The man didn't see Grace as a life worth protecting, only as property lost. "She's not yours anymore," Elias replied coldly. His voice carried the calm certainty honed over years in smoke and flame. "You didn't argue with fire. You stood your ground and knew the risks. This moment was no different." Grace appeared at the door, teeth bared. The man faltered, fear flashing in his eyes. He dropped the rope and retreated. Inside, Elias knelt beside Grace. "You kept us safe, girl. You're not alone anymore." He could feel her trembling, adrenaline still coursing through her lean frame. And as he stroked her scarred head, he marveled again at the courage that burned within her. Survival had been her language. Now, perhaps, trust was becoming one too. As the fire crackled, Grace pressed against him, her pups nestled nearby. In that moment, Elias thought of the ancient stories he used to read, legends of warriors who guarded what they loved, of small lights that pushed back long nights. Here in this humble cabin, such a story was unfolding in flesh and breath. Elias knew they weren't out of danger, but together they had faced the darkness, and together they would face whatever came next. Grace's journey from a frozen doorstep to a loving home was a testament to resilience, love, and the healing power of trust. And as the stars wheeled silently overhead, Elias made a quiet vow: whatever storms might come, this family was his to protect. No one would break that bond. If this story of resilience and second chances touched your heart, please like this video, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring animal rescue stories. Share this video to spread awareness. Together we can make a difference, one rescue at a time. Every click, share, and kind word helps shine a light on the countless animals still waiting for their own second chance. Imagine the ripple effect. One story can inspire action. One action can save a life. Let's be the voice for those who can't speak. Spread the word, foster hope, and remember, sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change an entire world.